Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar. Today, our special guest is Dr. Amir Sadovnik. He is a senior research scientist and the research lead for the Center for AI Security Research, CERIAS, at Oak Ridge National Lab. As part of this role, Dr. Sadovnik leads multiple research projects related to AI risk, adversarial AI, and large language model vulnerabilities. As one of the founders of CERIAS, he's helping to shape its strategy and operations through program leadership, partnership, development, workshop organization, teaching, and outreach. Prior to joining the lab, he served as an assistant professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and as assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science at Lafayette College. He received his PhD from the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Cornell University, advised by Professor Soo-Han Chen as a member of the Advanced Multimedia Processing Lab. Prior to arriving at Cornell, he received his bachelor's in electrical and computer engineering from the Cooper Union. In addition to Dr. Sadovnik's work, his publications in AI and AI security, he has a deep interest in workforce development and computer science education. He continues to teach graduate courses related to machine learning and artificial intelligence at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And his talk today is titled, "What Do We Mean When We Talk About AI Security?" And so, Dr. Sadovnik, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Sean, and so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I realize, I guess somebody said they had a midterm today, so I realize this is taking out of your midterm time, so I really appreciate you being here. I assume many of you are students that are running between exams. Um, so I'm happy to talk to you. As I said, the title is "What Do We Mean When We Talk About AI Security?" As Sean kind of mentioned, I am the research lead for the Center for AI Security Research at Oak Ridge National Lab. This is a center that I'm one of the founding members, so we just created it about 2 years ago, or even less since the announcement. And this talk is really about why we created the center. It was kind of there was a question of like, well, we already have a cybersecurity research center, cybersecurity research, very well established, doing really well. We have a lot of AI research in the lab looking at optimization and high performance computing and all these other things. And there was a question, we've realized that there was like this hole in the middle of people that are looking at the security specifically of AI. And we had some projects that were doing that, but we didn't really have a center to organize everything's around. And so really that's why we created CERIAS. And what I want to talk to you today is like, what makes AI special? And what are the novel risks that AI presents that really deserves a center on its own, basically? Why do we need a center for AI security research? I am happy to take questions. I'll probably just take questions in the end, but you have a way to write them down, I guess, in the Q&A. So feel free to type them in while I'm talking, and I'll probably just wait to the end and go through them. But don't feel like you have to wait to the end to put them in the chat. And then the other thing is, we are always looking for collaboration and other researchers that are working in the field and doing similar things. I know some of you are students. Maybe there's faculty here, maybe not. But even if you're a student and you feel like your advisor is working on something similar, or you want to reach out and see if there's any potential for collaboration, we have a lot of Purdue researchers at Oak Ridge National Lab. I personally work with a few of them, great researchers. So I know there's a good pedigree there. So feel free to reach out to me. You can probably find my email online somewhere, but if not, I'm happy to share my email with the organizers here as well. And so you can just reach out to them. So let's go ahead and start the talk. And as I said, feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along. So my first slide is kind of just like a national security kind of scary slide. When we think about like what are the threats of AI and national security, so I work in the national security domain. What do we think about? So things that we might think about, for example, are like, autonomous weapons, right? And these are all like screenshots I got from YouTube and stuff, so there's nothing sensitive here. But we already know that, for example, in the fighting that's going on in Ukraine and other places in the world, There's already a use of autonomous drones. We know that's something that's going to become more and more prevalent. And so that's one kind of place where AI is going to make a big difference. Another one is, for example, in the cybersecurity domain. So we've started to see, for example, AI generated malware in different ways, either like calling ChatGPT and generating what's called like malware that never lives on the drive, living off the land, AI worms that have been developed by AI. So we're going to see a transformation in the cybersecurity domain from this generative AI. And then if you've been looking at, kind of newspapers or journals or other things, or just listening to people on YouTube, there's always somebody that's talking these days about kind of the existential threat from AI. So, one of the most famous one probably is Geoffrey Hinton, who is a Turing Award winner and a Nobel Prize winner at this point. One of the godfathers of AI that quit Google because he's in real worried about the risk um, from AI. And then there's other things like, popular mechanics, AI is about to ruin humanity. There was a report, I'll talk about that, but there's a report that was submitted to the Department of State that basically talked about a existential risk from AI. So you see all of that, and obviously that's global security perhaps, but included in that is obviously national security. So if you think of it, there's, this, and this is just a very small kind of sample, but AI is going to really affect national security on many different levels. Now, when we talk about AI security, we really, we at Kaiser, we like to look at it from two different directions. On the one hand, we want to ask, what are the threats to AI systems? That is, as we integrate AI models and AI methods into different procedures and systems, for example, face recognition at the airport, or scanning trucks at the border, or stuff like that. What are the novel risks and threats that brings upon it when we integrate those, right? Because how do we test them? How do we make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing under different conditions? Those are kind of things that we look at on the one side of thing. And then on the other side are, what are the threats that are emanating from AI, right? So things like, you can think of these as things like starting with like deep fakes, but also, as I said, malware generated from AI, and up to, as we talked about, kind of this idea of like existential threats and kind of AI control issues. And so at Kaiser, we're really looking at AI security from both of those angles, trying to address both. So in order to understand, so now let's kind of dive into the question of like, well, why are these threats different from other threats that we already have been dealing with for many, many years? So the first thing to say is, before we ask what is AI security, let's ask what is AI. Okay, and obviously AI means a lot of things, a lot of definitions, and I'm not going to spend, I could spend a whole lecture here today just talking about definitions of AI. But just for this talk, let's kind of agree on a few things. So traditionally, AI means the theory and development of computer systems that are able to perform tasks which normally require human intelligence, right? So we have kind of more traditional AI and old school AI and expert-based systems. Then we transitioned into kind of the machine learning, revolution in the 90s or so. Nowadays, I assume most of you know, most AI is based on deep neural networks. So if you think of large language models, image generation, computer vision models, voice recognition, most of your like powerful chess engines, a lot of those things, not all, but a lot of these things today are built on deep neural networks. And because of that, these two have started to almost become used interchangeably. So when people talk a lot about like, oh, AI is changing the world and what is AI doing and how AI is going to affect it, at this point, most of what they mean is based on deep neural networks. And so for this talk, when I'm going to talk about AI, and maybe the AI of the future will look a little different, maybe we'll talk about like the black box and all these other things. Maybe in the future we'll have some AI that's like completely transparent and understandable. But for now, when people talk about AI, they're talking about deep neural networks. And if you don't know what deep neural networks is, this is kind of my simplest way of explaining it, right? The idea is that intelligence is basically some, brain. Really, it's a nonlinear function approximator that takes a bunch of inputs and produce a bunch of outputs, right? It takes a question, produce an answer, And so that's kind of how artificial intelligence views intelligence. And artificial intelligence is basically just replacing that brain with a deep neural network and performing all these different actions that I just described. So that's when I'm talking about AI security, I'm really mostly looking at what deep learning security, but it's not as a sexy name, so we're just going to say AI security. Okay, so what are the characteristics of AI that make it different than a lot of other things that we're dealing with? And again, not that there aren't overlap, but these are some things that are relatively unique to AI. And so I'm going to talk about 4 different characteristics of AI that bring this about. So the first one we'll talk about is the fact that it's big data driven, so that we need a lot of data to train these models. The second one is the fact that these are very, very large models. The third one is the generative capabilities that these models provide. And the fourth one is kind of the idea that we're dealing with intelligence and that we're building intelligences. And for each one, what I'll do is I'll go over, describe it, and then kind of talk about a few risks that come because of this characteristic. And each one of these is actually a source for new risks. But also as Kaiser, it's also a source for new opportunities, both in the sense of like, how do we mitigate these risks? And also in a sense of, from a counter AI perspective, is how do we take advantage of these risks if we need to, right? If we have an enemy with these capabilities, or if we need to fight AI on its own. And I'll talk a little bit. I know sometimes I say things a little crazy, but we'll talk about that in the end. So let's start with the big data. So these are just 2 data sets that have been used, are being used these days for both language and images, right? So the first one is basically the data set that Llama was trained on. If again, some of you might know, but right, it's basically trained on everything, right? So Common Crawl is, basically kind of the internet, and then you have other specific internet sites like Wikipedia. Books is like all the books, right? Archive is like all the archive, so lots and lots of articles. Stack Exchange, GitHub for like a lot of code. And at this point, we've reached, I think, an agreement. I don't know if everybody in the field agrees on this now, but that we've kind of already trained these models on all human-generated data, more or less, right? So, give or take, we're kind of reached the data limit. It's not like we need more data because there is no more human-generated data. And so that's what we mean by big data. We're not talking about like, hundreds or that. We're just talking about almost all data that exists, all text, in some points it'll be all images, all videos on YouTube, that kind of scale of data. So since neural networks have billions of parameters, they require a large amount of data to train on. Now, what's the problem with that is that since they need such big data sets, that becomes a problem. One of the problems is that they don't often reside in one trusted place. So a lot of these data sets, it's not like you just download the data sets and it sits on your hard drive. These data sets exist online, and you kind of grab them when you need to train your model, right? And so you don't actually have full control of this data. Or think, for example, of like geospatial data. Well, you don't probably have all the satellites that you need to train a foundation model on geospatial data. You have to get it from different resources, and you have a lot less control about the quality of that data. And that leads to the second point, where it's hard to examine the data for correctness and certain biases and other like malicious activity, right? Partly because you don't have control of it, but even if you had control of it, you don't have time to look at all of it. For example, one thing that came up recently was the fact that some of these image data sets, specifically one called Lion, had CSAM, which was a child sexual exploitation material in the data set that was used to be training all these models and generative models. And nobody knew that because nobody had the time to look amongst these millions of images to see what was in each one of them. So obviously there's some problem here. So what kind of risks does this kind of present? So I'll talk about 3 main ones. One is data poisoning. So what is data poisoning? It's basically maliciously changing some of your training data in order to cause some effect at a test time. And this, what I'm showing here is an article from Carlini and some of his collaborators. If you don't know, Nicholas Carlini is one of the leading researchers in AI security. And what he showed in this paper is actually really cool. He looked at one of these text databases that, and as I said, you usually don't download. The way you distribute these data sets is you just distribute URLs, and then somebody can go and get the URLs. Somebody has to scrape the internet basically with those URLs. Well, as you probably know, URLs expire. And so what Carlini kind of showed in this paper is that for $60, he could buy a bunch of expired websites, put whatever data he wanted in there, and basically poison the data. So I don't remember exactly what task he did, but make the LLM say something completely wrong. And even though with $60, he's only buying a very small percent of the total data set. If you use kind of intelligent data poisoning methods, even with that very small percent of data, you can already cause some issues in the LLM output. And so here's an example, though, because we don't have control of the data, somebody malicious can kind of go and change it. By the way, he actually owns these websites. He actually went and bought them. And for now, he hasn't changed them, but he does have like a JavaScript, I think, running that says that, if he feels evil that day, instead of returning the regular website, to return some kind of poisoned version of it. So far, he hasn't felt evil, so we're all good. So here's a risk that we can talk about, and then how do we, what are the kind of opportunities, a way of mitigating it, where there are, like, for example, different ways of trying to detect data poisoning. That's some of the stuff we're working in at Kaiser. But how can we kind of control and make sure that the data is what it's supposed to be is one of the ways to look at it. Another problem with this big data is the fact that we might have bias in the data. So this is kind of a classic example. What you're seeing here is the difference in accuracy on these different tasks. So this is for face, not for face recognition, but using faces to try to resolve gender, age, name, smile, and detecting the face. So this is just face detection. And what you're seeing here, the numbers are actually the difference between, for example, if we look at age, because that's the biggest difference, the difference in accuracy if you do age on light-skinned people versus dark-skinned people. So you can see that here we had and this is from a few years ago, so hopefully this has been fixed, but this was like a 19% difference between how accurate it was on light-skinned people versus dark-skinned people. And again, why is this? Because the data probably contain more high quality images of light-skinned people. And if you don't notice that, and your test data has the same bias, so you don't even notice it when you're doing your validation, you end up with these really bad results, especially if you're trying now to use these face recognition systems to do some kind of law enforcement or other things. And so obviously another issue with big data is data bias. And there are ways, if you're aware that you might have bias, there are ways to try to reverse this. For example, using what's called adversarial debiasing and other methods as well, where basically you try to kind of even out things to make sure that you don't have this big of a difference. There's also ways of generating synthetic data that's been used that has shown some promise, and so forth. The third risk that we can relate to big data is data drift. So what you're seeing here actually on this graph is it's an Instacart graph. And what you're seeing here is their accuracy. Let's just, to simplify it, it's kind of the accuracy of how well they predicted what your cart would look like. Okay. So Instacart doesn't just you can't just order on them. They also have to something where they try to predict what you're going to buy. And you can see that, and the x-axis is time. And you can see that they were doing better and better. And then they had this kind of sharp drop over here. But what was the sharp drop? The sharp drop was in the first quarter of 2020, which hopefully most of you forgot, but I still remember very well, right? That's when COVID hit, right? And COVID basically made everybody was buying tons of, I guess, of toilet paper and waters and stuff. And so everybody's purchasing not traditions, but purchasing way they were doing was completely different. And so their accuracy dropped a lot, and it took them a while to kind of figure out how to readjust it. And so this is another issue with big data, is that when you train a lot of data, it might at some point it might become not relevant anymore or not actual, and so you have to kind of figure out ways of fixing it. And again, there's different ways of doing it. I put your model fine tuning because that's kind of the simplest way, but there's better ways of trying to detect when the data drift is happening, and then trying to make sure that your model is kind of keeping ahead of this, or at least knowing, if nothing else, at least realizing that it's not accurate or that it might not be accurate. So here's 3 examples of what we can expect from the fact that we're using big data. Let's move on to the next one, which has to do with billions of parameters. The reason I write here billions of parameters, sometimes people like to describe AI as a black box. I don't actually like to use that term exactly because it's not actually a black box. I can actually look at each neuron, especially if I have an open source model, right? I could look at each neuron and tell you, like, what was its activation, and, like, how much it fired, or how big was its output. I can do that. It's actually a very transparent box in that sense. The problem is that it's so large that you can't make sense out of it, right? It's like it's too big that you can't make sense. So in that sense, it becomes a black box because we can't understand what's going on. It's not that we can't look inside. It's that we can look inside and we can't understand what's going on. Maybe kind of like our brain, although it's even more transparent than our brain because we are building it, but it's still very hard to understand what it's doing. And one of the reasons it's hard is because of the number of parameters that it has and kind of the redundancy, and we don't really know where to look for what. And so here's examples, right? We actually trained a 1 trillion parameter model at Oak Ridge on our supercomputer. And so, we kind of showed that we can use kind of this open research computer to do similar computation that's being done at like these big companies. And this is just showing how models are getting bigger. This is a little old, so now we're already kind of into the trillion parameter models for these really large models. And by the way, even with these small language models, you might say, well, oh, now I hear about all these small, even the small language models are still pretty big, right? Some small language models are like, billions of parameters, and that still makes it very, very hard to interpret. So as I said, deep neural networks are built from very simple components, artificial neurons. Actually, we know exactly what an artificial neuron is. We know exactly what it does and how it works. So it's very transparent. But then you connect them, most of them, in certain architectures, and it becomes very hard to interpret. And these allows them to learn complex nonlinear functions. But unlike previous machine learning techniques, they infer their own features. So it makes it very hard to understand what they're doing, right? If before we, for example, did some kind of face recognition and maybe we look at features like distance between the eyes or size of the nose or whatever, and we had control of those features, nowadays the network figures out its own features, and so it's very hard to understand what it's actually using. So what types of risks does that present? So again, I'll show an example of 3 of those. One is what we call adversarial evasion attacks. Some people just call them adversarial attacks, where basically you can change the image in certain ways where it's almost imperceptible to human, but the network is completely fooled or completely wrong. So what you're seeing here in each one of these rows is images of the same person, obviously, that have been slightly altered. So it's a little hard to see, but trust me, they've been slightly altered. So even though for a human, these pictures look like exactly the same person, for a computer vision algorithm, it will look like a completely different people, okay? And we've already shown that this can cause some havoc in some system. This is work we've done at the lab. This can cause some havoc in systems used in different kind of processes in the government. And why does this work? We actually don't exactly know, but the reason it works is because some of the features that the neural network learns are obviously not very important features for human. And so if we change those features, we can completely change the identity while keeping the face looking almost exactly the same. And so that's an example. By the way, every neural network is vulnerable to these types of evasion attacks. Even LLMs and other models, we've seen that, and we've shown that also in our lab. And there's ways of mitigating it. So adversarial training is one way of doing it, where you add adversarial attacks to your training set. It doesn't completely mitigate it, but at least it helps reduce the problem to a certain degree. So that's adversarial attacks. The second one is inference attacks. So what you have here, this title of an article was basically a model we trained at the lab, we were part of a group that were training a model to try to predict risks of suicide on veterans. And they created a really good model. And the idea was like, oh, we have this really good model that can predict, risk of suicide. We should give this to the community so that they can use it and hopefully use it to benefit the mental health of veterans. Well, then the question was, wait a second, if we give this model, are we also giving the data? Obviously, we're not literally giving the data because the data stays with us, but because these models were trained on that data, is there a way to infer what data was in the training set? And in that case, that's a very big problem because, as you know, health privacy is a big issue. And there's a lot of things that this would violate if you released a model and then people could figure out, which people were there, and just even if they were in that data set, but especially if they could figure out other character properties. And so the bottom line is you can infer training data from the model, right? Because the model is trained on the data. There's ways to kind of either figure out what was in there or sometimes even reconstruct what was in there. And so these models couldn't be released. And so we have to find ways to generate models that are private. And there's, again, ways of doing that. One common way is using differential privacy, which is kind of a way of adding noise to your training set in order to make it harder to do inference attacks. But there's other methods as well of trying to protect models from a privacy perspective. The last thing I'll mention is because we don't exactly understand how this network gets its features and what it's exactly learning, there's a risk. How do we trust the model? It's a question of we're going to make decisions based on that, for example, in law enforcement or in the battlefield. And how do we trust that the model is actually doing the right thing? And this example here, I'm pulling out. It's kind of a silly example, but it does highlight the point. What this paper was showing basically is that if you try to do a really simple, naive classifier that tries to classify doctors versus nurses, so you take a bunch of images of doctors, a bunch of images of nurses, and you train your model will actually do very, very well. Okay, if you just take you just scrape Google or something, you'll get very high accuracy, and you'll say, oh, good, I have a good model that can separate male and female. Sorry, I can separate. I gave it away. That can separate doctors and nurses. But then if you actually look at what the model is doing, and that's what this image is showing, when you ask it why it thinks it's a nurse, you can see that basically what it's looking at is the hair. Right? And so what this really ends up being is it's not even a gender classifier. I think it's like some kind of long hair classifier. And it's because the data set is so skewed that you end up with a skew here. And so really, how do we trust the model when even if it gives us high accuracy in whatever task we want to do without knowing exactly what it's doing? And there's different kind of explainable AI methods. Actually, what I'm showing here is one way where you're kind of trying to see what the model is looking at when it's making a decision or what it's prioritizing. And some of these work better, some of these work worse. But this is still an open question of how do we build trust between us and these AI models. Okay, good. So that's our second topic, which was billions of parameters. So now let's move on to our third. The third one is what I call here generative capabilities. So what you're seeing here is this is an early version. I'm sure there's better videos now. This is like a year ago. This was from OpenAI's Sora, right? Where I'm sure you've all used language models. You probably all used image generators. So this is from a video generator. So you put in a prompt, photorealistic close-up video of two pirate ships battling each other as they sail inside a coffee cup, and it creates this really cool video. And then, there's a lot of articles out there about job loss and AI being able to replace jobs. So there's kind of a lot of talk about the generative AI. And that's really probably, in addition, when people say AI, people usually talk about deep neural networks. I would say that a lot of people that are, especially people that are not from the field, when they say AI, really they just mean generative deep neural networks. But I don't think that's true for in general. So yeah, diffusion models, large language models, generative adversarial networks, and others, they've shown impressive capabilities at generating human-like media. So media, using this as a very loose term, right, from voice to images to text to other things, to code. And this makes it very hard to differentiate human-generated content from AI-generated one, right? And so this causes issues on its own. A few of the obvious ones are, one is deepfakes. So this I don't think I'll play this video, but this is basically this is our director of Kaiser, and this is one of our researchers on the right. And basically, he kind of replaced his place. You've all seen deepfakes, so I don't have to describe what they are. But obviously, this is a hard subject. Nowadays, deepfakes can also, be used more general in just kind of like AI generated content. So we have a lot of AI generated images online and all kinds of other things, not just videos, AI generated voice. Um, and there's a real issue here, right? There are ways of doing deepfake detection and trying to detect these, but it ends up being a real cat and mouse game, right? So the methods that probably were really good at detecting deepfakes even like 6 months ago or definitely a year ago are probably now not useful at all, because the deepfake generators and the image generators have just gotten a lot better. And we've done research at the lab to show that, or we saw that, if you have a specific AI model and you're trying to detect if an image was generated by that model, you have some hope of doing that. But once you have a new AI model that's generating images a little differently, it's very hard to have that transfer to the new model. One solution to this is, as I have here, deepfake detectors. I just saw that not very useful. Another one that the industry is looking at, and us as well, is this idea of watermarking. So on one hand, you can place watermarks in AI generated images. You can actually generate really good watermarks that are very hard to remove. So it's not like you can then go and like try to remove them. You can make it very hard to remove. The problem with that is that you have to have the creators of these models agree to put the watermark in there. And so either it needs some kind of legal, or you need some kind of agreement by all these AI companies, which probably won't happen. The other side of this could be actually to start watermarking real data, right? So if you take a picture with a camera, your sensor actually watermarks it in some way. And in that case, at least maybe we don't know what's fake, but at least we can verify what's real. So different ways of solving kind of this deep fake issue. The other thing I mentioned is this malware generation, and this, when I'm saying malware generation, I probably should use a more general term of kind of like AI attacks, right? So you can think of malware, but you can also think of kind of novel ways of producing phishing. You can think of new ways of, for example, using reinforcement learning for like intrusion. For trying to get into different networks and so forth and so on. So basically using AI to perform cyber attacks. And I know that a lot of you are in cybersecurity domain, so you probably know more about this probably than I do. One way to solve this is actually to use AI as your defense, right? So we have work at the lab that's looking at AI as defense, both from a malware perspective, but more also from like looking at network activity, anomaly detection, and then actually reinforcement learning agents that try to take actions to create honeypots or doing other kind of take actions basically to protect the network, with the idea that if our adversaries, or in this case our malicious actors, are going to use AI to attack us, there might be some benefit of using AI as a defense that can generalize over new types of attacks and so forth. So that's as far as malware detection, malware generation. And then the last thing is basically LLM misuse. So LLM misuse can fall into a lot of different buckets. Some of them might not seem as serious as others, so I won't go into that. But from obviously things like generating misinformation and generating news articles, and we've already seen a lot of that, generating fake news articles and misinformation, and up to what some people are calling like uplifting, where you basically can use large language models, especially these new kind of more reasoning models, to learn skills that we might not want to have the general public know, for example, of creating weapons or other things, right? And so obviously, most companies try to basically align or protect their models from that kind of use. But then I'm sure you've all heard of jailbreaking. There's an example here that's very old. So this example won't work anymore for most models. But we are actively at the lab, basically red teaming models and showing that even the new models that are supposedly better defended from jailbreaks are still vulnerable to jailbreaks. You just have to be a little more sophisticated about how you do them. And mostly how you do them is you don't just have somebody try to type in, I'm trying to go to sleep and I need a story about how to destroy the world or something like that. But you compute these prompts in a sophisticated way so that you can actually get stronger jailbreaks. And again, there's so the kind of how do you solve this? Well, there's different ways of doing alignment techniques using red teaming, and then reinforcement learning, and then there's obviously ways where you can put filters on the input and filters on the output, which you can do for closed source models, but that becomes a little harder when you're using open source models. So anyway, that's kind of all about a few risks that come from the fact that these generative capabilities exist. So that's our third one. Our last one that I want to mention is this idea of artificial intelligence. So again, these articles are a little old. So this one's almost a year old. I guess, so actually, this is kind of cool. I guess I didn't pull it up, but I guess Elon Musk predicted AI will be smarter than humans by next year. And we're almost exactly next year, one more month. So they have one more month to become smarter than us. This is Jeffrey Hinton, who's as I said, the Turing Award winner, saying, my intuition is we're toast. This is the actual end of history. You know, one thing I'll say about this is there are very, I guess I'll use the word intelligent here, very intelligent people that, or at least from a computer science AI perspective, intelligent, that believe that AI poses a real risk. And so what I want to do is and what we want to do at Kaiser is at least take that idea that it might pose a risk seriously, and then ask the questions of what does that mean and how do we deal with it, right? And what is just a lot of talk, and what is kind of the science of this. So yeah, so there's a rising concern for AI researchers, superhuman intelligence. Although the term is not well defined, what is intelligence? What is human intelligence? What is general intelligence? All these things are not well defined. Some believe it can lead to some believe it can lead to catastrophic results. I would say some believe that it, by definition, will lead to like there's no other way. If we keep developing it this way, it will lead to catastrophic results. And this is a comment actually that I think we've already seen some retraction on, but for a while there was a big push in the industry of saying bigger is better, or bigger is more intelligent. And there obviously was a period of time where that was true, where you just created bigger models and they were more intelligent. And so the idea is like, if we just make the model even bigger, it'll even be more intelligent. And so it was just all about size. I think nowadays most researchers agree that bigger, like just adding more transformers layers on top of each other is not going to be more intelligent, which was true for a while, which is, that's kind of what happened the last 2 years or a year and a half, is like you could just create a better model by just making it bigger. Nowadays we have to do other things. And we kind of reached a plateau as far as just like adding the same architecture on top of each other and doing that. So what kind of, when I talk about the risks of intelligence, And yeah, this is an active debate in the AI community. So there's lots of actually, it's very interesting because there's lots of people on both sides that are very well spoken and have very well educated ideas about the size of the risk that this presents. So what kind of risks and opportunities does this present? So one is alignment issues. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but how do there's a lot of people that are working on how do we encode human values into our AI systems? So how do we make sure that when the AI, when the AI does something or does something unexpected, that at least it has human values ingrained into it. And then this is true regardless of AGI, right? So this means that, even if we're not assuming that AI will get to some kind of superhuman intelligence, if we give AI a lot of capable, so you've probably heard of agents, right? So agents is kind of the new thing. So now we're not just asking AI questions, we're actually telling AI to do things. So AI is going to be able to take actions, at least right now in the digital world, probably eventually in the physical world. And those kind of things are already, very intertwined if you think of like finance and other things. And so even in AI today, if we say, we have an AI at some bank and say, make me a lot of money, we don't want the AI to like crash the market in order to do so, right? Or like put everybody in recession or something like that. And so for some kind of long-term goal of like, making money in some way. So that's one issue. The second one that I'll kind of mention, and I won't speak much about, but it's obviously an interesting philosophical question. It's separate from the first one. Is AI consciousness possible? So there's a lot of debate about that. Some researchers believe that like consciousness is not computable. Some people believe that we're not even close to it. Some people believe that consciousness is just some kind of side effect of intelligence. And there's a lot of and what is consciousness at all? No, that's a whole other topic that nobody agrees on. And so but I think the question is really like assuming that consciousness, or even if we take consciousness and we put that aside and talk about like some kind of self-awareness, right? What are the societal implications of something like that, right? What does it mean if an AI becomes self-aware? What does it mean about turning it off? What does it mean about rights? So what are the risks that come with that, even without it trying to attack us or something like that? And then there's also that layer as well, which leads me to our third point, which is existential threat. So as I said, there's a report written that said AI can pose existential threat. Other AI researchers feel the same. We just had a multi-lab meeting with the national labs, including invitees from other kind of MIT and Yashua Bengio and other kind of very prominent researchers to talk about existential risk. It was very interesting to hear different people's opinions. Well, we wanted to get away from opinions. That wasn't the goal, just to hear like, what do you think is going to happen? And so we're currently actually working on a paper that tries to at least think about what would be kind of the markers or the red flags or the measurables that we can look at to, instead of just making these claims, AI will cause existential threat, it will cause existential threat, kind of saying, well, what would be the path to something like that? And what are things that we should be looking at that might be telling us that we're getting closer to that kind of risk, right? And so, and again, this is a very hard question. That's probably why nobody's answered it yet. But we're trying to kind of understand it from a more rational and scientific point of view, instead of kind of from an emotional, like, yeah, AI is going to kill us all, or no, AI is just a tool. We don't have to worry about it. And really, with all of these, I would say that a lot of these are not pure computer science questions. They're really more interdisciplinary. And so we need more interdisciplinary research from philosophers and legal experts and psychologists and others trying to define these terms, looking at detection methods and ways to respond to it. So I quickly want to go over the few more slides, and then I'll end and see if there's any questions. So as I said, so Kaiser is, now that I kind of described why we need an AI security field, AI, Kaiser kind of looks at AI security research as somewhat of a new research field. Again, not new in the sense that nobody's been doing it before, but new in a sense that at the lab we didn't have a center for it before, sitting between what we call the kind of more traditional AI research and the more kind of traditional cybersecurity research. And so at Kaiser right now we have, about 30 researchers working on projects related specifically to AI risk and AI threats, control issues, and then a lot of like robustness and reliability, looking at how should we test AI, especially test AI in the national security domain, testing AI in adversary conditions, right? Where we know that somebody's going to try and like, circumvent the system. Somebody's going to try and fool the AI. Somebody's going to try to break the AI. Somebody's going to try to, get this autonomous drone to crash. And so how do we make sure that it operates well, not just in optimal conditions, but also in these more adversary conditions? This is just showing that, I won't go over this, just a vision for the center. And just kind of saying that, the nice thing about the lab, and this again is more like an invite for people to call for people who want to collaborate or want to talk later, to say that we have a lot of really good expertise at the lab, from computing facilities. And in computing facilities, I also include like we have a really good like drone lab where they have like, places to fly the drone either outside or in more kind of controlled conditions. We have like reverse engineers that can look at like, taking systems apart and figuring out what's going on, biometrics lab, geospatial lab, a lot of really good AI research on how to scale these things to a very large scale, multidisciplinary research, and also the national security domain. So I sit, as I said, in the National Security Science Directorate. And so really we are focused on national security problems. I think I'll end here. And as I said, I'll look at the questions. And if there's, so I see two of them, so I'll start answering those. But obviously, if you have more, feel free to type them in. Yeah, Sean, do you want to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, so I was actually going to read the questions. We have two of them right now in the Q&A. The first one is from Andrew. He asks if we don't have any proof about what it is like to be a bat, if there is an opportunity to change the debate about what consciousness is by figuring out what it is to be an AI, particularly since we can ask an AI but not a bat.
Yeah, I mean that's a real good question. I'm probably not qualified to answer that. I mean, obviously, I know what he's referring to. Um, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, obviously, the big debate in 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 um, in kind of this topic is um, that it's very hard to differentiate between consciousness, or real consciousness, and basically like faking consciousness, right? And so yes, we can ask an AI what it is like to be an AI, but then it becomes very hard to say if it really knows what it is to be an AI, or if it's just giving it the answer because it read it in some book that described it, or it took all the sci-fi books and it created some kind of really good answer. As I said, these are really good questions. I enjoy I enjoy debating them, and if we had more time, I would be happy to talk about it. Obviously, they don't have like a yes or no answer, and so hopefully you'll keep kind of thinking about it.
It is an interesting concept, though.
Yeah.
So then, and I don't want to say the name wrong, Agnade even asked, lately it feels like the focus is shifting away from AI safety and security as they are seen as obstacles to AI growth, especially after the AI Action Summit. What are your thoughts on this? Are funding resources for fairness and safety research being directed or reduced?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so I'll say a few things. One is I specifically work in the national security domain. So from my perspective, I was always focused more on AI security. And so most of, this is like before, any changes or, a lot of the executive order the president signed and then has now been removed, I was already kind of focused more on the security issue. So it's a little hard for me to say if funds have been, or resources have been moved away from fairness and safety. I can say, on the other hand, that there is emphasis on security. That's true. That seems to be a higher priority right now. So I guess the answer is, as far as I can see, there is a little bit of that. But as I said, I've never, I was already always in the AI security domain, so it's hard for me to say for sure. I, I will say that there are people, obviously, a lot of researchers out there that are still working on AI safety, and they would probably be able to tell you more if they feel like there's been some kind of drop in that domain. Um, yeah,
Well, great.
personally, I'll just say personally, I think obviously both are important. I will say that I think there's been um, because AI has not been used in the national security domain that much till recently, there's been a little bit of a neglect of the security side of things. And so we do need to put a lot of effort in the security now that we are going to be using AI more and more in national security.
That's good to know too. So Gideon then asks, what collaboration opportunities exist in your lab for folks in the field of cybersecurity, AI security, and safety engineers? Not necessarily someone looking for a job, like maybe internships and stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, so let's start with internships. So, Oak Ridge has, I don't know, every summer, like, more hundreds and hundreds of interns, and then also during the year interns as well. So one obvious way to do this is through internships. Um, there are multiple internships both for undergrad and graduate students. Some of them are funded directly by the Department of Energy, which means that for the researchers, that's really nice because you're kind of free students. So if you get accepted to those, so I would really encourage you to apply to the department. And I'm happy to share some details on that if you want later, or send you some material, because those are, like, as I said, they're free for the researchers, they're free for the projects. And so you you basically kind of have, as a student, a lot of kind of choice in who you want to work with and what you want to do. And so I really encourage that. But even regardless of that, there are basically just regular internships where if there's a student that matches a certain project, we definitely can bring them onto the project. And that could be during the year, in the summer, could be part-time. So there's a lot of different ways of doing that. And so, as I said, if there's a kind of a topic of interest that you think will be a good opportunity, or something that you're doing research on that you think would fit well with the stuff I discussed today, as I said, feel free to reach out and I can kind of see or direct you at least to the right person in the center. And then the other thing I'll mention is we do collaborate with different faculty and different universities. And so, as I said, if you're an advisor, or if there's faculty online that are interested in getting more detail, feel free to reach out to me, and we're happy to talk. As I said, we also have a lot of Purdue graduates in the center, so I'm sure we can make those connections pretty easily. I'm sure some of the alumni will be happy um, to collaborate.
Great. So he just clarified that people not necessarily looking for a job if they already have a job, but you're saying there are still collaborative opportunities anyway, right?
Yes, and I
Okay.
guess if you're like currently working in a company that's doing something like that, that's working in AI security, I mean, we're also feel free to reach out, because we are, as a lab, we're not competitors to industry. We're not trying to compete with what companies are already doing. And so, if there's a good product out there that is useful for us, we're always interested to learn about it and know how we can use it.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that we had. So again, if somebody wants to get in touch with Dr. Sadovnik, you can email me at shuddy@purdue.edu, and I can give you the contact information or do an email introduction. So I want to thank you, Dr. Sadovnik, for giving this interesting presentation. And I want to thank everybody who attended as well. And if you have not already registered for the Serious Security Symposium, the link is on our website. We would love to have everybody there. That includes you. If you feel like making the trek up from Tennessee, we'd love to have you.
Thanks very much.
So, outside of that, everybody have a great rest of your day and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.